Seasonic, the heart of your system.
I'm Leo Warder for Kit Guru. This case by Aerocool is called TOR, T-O-R, and it is all about the RGB and the glass. Glass at the front, glass at the side, RGB at the front. These two sort of square shapes, they are called edge addressable fans. So the LEDs go around the periphery of the fan, 2x140s, and here we have an illuminated side panel over the power supply shroud, which is slightly unusual in that it means you have this kind of lip before you get in the main compartment. I can illustrate the point about the main compartment by taking this Asus ROG Crosshair 7 Hero motherboard, which is a conventional ATX board, and if I offer it up flat, it does not go. To get it in, you kind of have to step it in there, put it in there, move it back, slide it into the I/O. Not the end of the world, but not quite necessarily what you expect. Something that is slightly more concerning is this radiator cutout here. If you're using a 280 rad or all-in-one, the radiator, so this 240 Aerocool could sit there potentially. If you're using a 280, it's going to have to sit down, thus like so, and I haven't yet found a 280 rad that will actually go in there. Aerocool is quite clear your radiator needs to be less than 20 or thinner than 27mm. I can't find such a radiator all-in-one on the market. So to my mind, a 280 all-in-one or standalone radiator for a custom loop, which would be a very strange setup in this case, isn't going to go in there. Because that cutout simply isn't large enough. But there's more to it than that. When I pull off the front panel, which is tethered by the front I/O cables, not a mad keen fan of that, and reveal the Edge 14 fans, which as the name suggests are nominally 140mm fans, they are actually 120 fans, but they have these lights, LEDs around the outside that makes them essentially 140 fans. So functionally they're 120s with the LEDs. So the spacing is wider than you'd expect for 120s, but the mounts actually suit 120s. So there's a slightly strange thing going on there. When you're cooling your build in your new TOR case, and TOR's a funny name because that's a browser after all, which suggests dark web and drugs and goodness knows what else, but putting that to one side. When you're building into this case, you're going to be going budget for sure, in which case air cooling is the obvious way because that's cheap and easy. Putting an all-in-one in this case is going to increase the value. Custom loop would make very little sense. So you're going to want to hang on to these two fans because they are a major part of the price of the system. These fans sell for £14 each. The case itself, depending on where you go, £62 to £67. So £28 out of 67 is a massive percentage. The idea you're going to buy this case and dispose of these fans, that ain't happening. My guess is instead you're going to go for an air tower. Leave the lights at the front alone, air tower, dumb fan at the back to get the air out. Happiness. Now, what else have we got? Take off the rear panel, 2 thumb screws, it's just a piece of plain steel, nothing fancy, but at this price point you don't expect that. And we have a fan hub that supports up to 10 RGB fans. The thing is, these are proprietary connectors and they suit, as far as I can see, 2 Aerocool fans. These Edge 14s and also Eclipse 12. You can put either 2 140s or these 14s in the front or 3 120s, so maximum 3 in the front, but you're not going to do that because you've got your 2. You can add 2 in the roof. You've got your dumb black fan at the rear. You might, I guess, upgrade that to an Eclipse 12. Potentially you'll have 5 RGB fans in this case connected to that hub. The other 5 connectors, they're for nothing. They are pointless. If you buy Edge 14 or Eclipse 12 fans and you don't have an Aerocool case, you get adapter cables with them and you can plug them into your whatever motherboard and whatever case. You can either control them manually or you can control them through the Aura or whatever settings of your motherboard in another case. In this case, if you plug them in, you've got the correct connectors and you're laughing. If you already have a bunch of fans, different RGB fans, Corsair or Cooler Master or whatever, they aren't going to connect to that hub. You can connect them directly to your motherboard or however you choose to do things. I'm not going to say this is the end of the world, because it's not. Realistically, if you're buying this case, you're unlikely to invest in extra fans, extra RGB fans anyway. But in the event you already have RGB fans, you're not connecting them to that hub. That hub is going to go mostly unused. Down here we have a couple of drive caddies. You kind of squeeze and pull, and out they come. They're combo 2.5, 3.5s, and we've got a couple of 2.5 sleds there. No optical drive bay at the front, of course, but with So to sum up, we've got a couple of quirky RGB fan supply. We've got the RGB power supply shroud. We've got a separate compartment for the power supply. We have nominal support for liquid cooling, but in the real world, I have my doubts about that. We have a reasonable amount of support for drive bays, and it's really cheap. That's what this keeps coming back to, really cheap. Less than £70 or just above £60, and you're getting about £30 worth of fans. This chassis is something like 35 quid. That's cheap. While I was sorting out which hardware to use for this build, I went back to Aerocool's website to check a couple of points, and I found there is also a version in this case called TOR Pro that I wasn't aware of. Here in the UK that costs an extra £27. It comes with 4 RGB fans, 3 at the front, 1 at the rear, which confirms my maths that the core chassis is £35, and then on top of that you're paying for the RGB fans. And with the RGB fans, particularly the ones at the front, in this instance, which are Edge 14, the product page on Aerocool's website for Edge 14 makes quite clear there are 120 fans with the LEDs around the outside. They are not for use on liquid cooled builds. They just don't fit radiators. I mean, you could put presumably one on a single 120 rad, but whatever. So therefore, while this chassis does nominally support radiators, nah, not with these fans. Hence, I've gone down the route I have, which is a processor that is AMD Ryzen 2700X, so 8-core, 16 threads. Motherboard, Asus ROG Crosshair 7 Hero Wi-Fi, I've already shown you. The cooler, Arctic Freezer 33TR. That little cooler does actually support Threadripper. 32GB Corsair Vengeance LP memory. Graphics card, it's a beast. Asus ROG Strix RX Vega 64, that's 8GB, and then the power supply, Aerocool Integrator 700W RGB. There is indeed RGB going around the back of this chassis, and the SSD is a tiny little Toshiba RC100 M.2, which is under the heatsink on the motherboard. So the build went absolutely fine, except for the fact that I wounded myself twice as it happens. That's pulling off the front panel. It comes loose with a real bang when it comes, and there's obviously some sharp edge somewhere that caught me, not once but twice. So somewhat annoyed about that, not massively surprised. It's often the way with cheap cases, they have sharp edges here and there. Having said that, I don't know why anyone would actually remove the front panel apart from when they're reviewing it, because that front panel is completely sealed. The airflow comes through the roof. This case is highly reminiscent of the Corsair Carbide 678C, except Corsair put a fan in the roof in intake. The front, it's all about show, it's not about air. Air comes in the top and is expelled through the back, and presumably various other leaks and such like around, but essentially in there, out there. So two things about this case. The cooling. The cooling is not great. I mean, I have built a relative beast of a system into this real budget chassis, so I'm not shocked that the cooling is not wonderful, particularly as the front doesn't flow air worth anything. Under extreme load, the CPU runs at 85 Celsius, the GPU at 80 Celsius, but pull off the main glass or pull off the front panel, you drop those temps by 5 degrees. Pull off the main glass and the front panel, you drop temps by 10 degrees, which just goes to show this case wants more air, but I have put a lot of hardware in there. I'm not honestly bothered about those temperatures, I'm really not. The thing is, were I to build what I think is the type of system people would use this case for, say a Ryzen 3 or a Ryzen 5 and a GTX 1050 or 1150, I think the average kit guru reader would go, well, I don't care, because I'm not going to use that hardware. So I've used hardware I think is appropriate to Kit Guru, which I think is over the top for this case, and it works, it does. An area where I do have an issue is the RGB. Now you may look at this and go, well, it's all very nice, it's all integrated and whole. It's not, it's two separate systems. Asus Aura is controlling the motherboard and the graphics card, and the case hardware is controlling the power supply shroud and the two fans at the front. What you can see there is also going on around the front. I do have the case connected to the motherboard using the second ARGB connector at the top of the board. Therefore, Asus Aura should be controlling the whole thing as a whole. It is not. It doesn't work. But we've all got horror stories about RGB software, and this is unfortunately not a massive surprise. I have to say that Aerocool's control of their RGB hardware is actually really good. You've got this remote, you've got micro buttons on the hub, and you've got a control button on the front, and I can just click this. And look, you will see the case lighting is changing, the motherboard and graphics card remain the same. And if I use Asus Aura to change the lighting systems inside the system, the case remains the same. It is two separate systems. It's a shame, but that's just how it is. It might be if you're using a Gigabyte system or an MSI system, it behaves better. Generally speaking, actually, Asus Aura is pretty good, but in this instance, it just ain't behaving. Having said that, if you're buying a budget chassis, realistically, are you connecting to a motherboard with an ARGB header? I'm going to hazard a guess the answer is no, you're not. I have a gripe about the mounting holes for the glass. You can put the glass on 1, 2, 3, 4 positions, flip it over 1, 2, 3, 4. The holes are off center. There is only one position of the 8 options that actually makes the glass go on neatly and doesn't hang off one end or the other. Also, it's really tight for space, but you often get that at budget cases. They build them as small as possible, they pack them as small as possible, you get as many boxes as possible on a pallet. So this ATX motherboard is almost shrunk wrap within the main compartment, very little space, and then around the back there is also the minimum of space. I've actually removed the 2 drive caddies, so there's more space for the Aerocool cabling from the power supply to go. If you're using all the drive bays and putting in a regular power supply, you will struggle to get the cables in. You'll be leaning on that back panel and sliding it in. But I think it's doable, but it's going to be tight. Also, cable management holes. There's no grommets, not surprisingly. The cable management tie-down points, anchor points for cable ties are few and far between. A number of issues, but none of which are actually killer complaints, surprisingly, for a case so cheap. Basically, if you're buying this, you're buying it because it's cheap and it looks the way it looks. And if you're buying it and that's what you want, you'll be happy. If you're looking for this as a performance case that's really cheap, I think you'll be sadly disappointed. So buy it for the RGB. If you want higher airflow, there are many more cases on the market. Use your common sense, you'll be fine. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down. Hit the bell button, subscribe. We like subscribers, and the bell button means we'll tell you about new videos as they become available. I'm Leo Woodard for Kit Guru. This is Aerocool TOR.